The cantina on Station Epsilon 7 was loud tonight.
Ow.
Smoke from a dozen different worlds drifted through the air. Strange music played from hidden speakers while aliens from across the galaxy shared drinks and stories. But in the darkest corner, where the lights barely reached, sat a figure that made even the toughest smugglers keep their distance. Vextel nursed his third bottle of Regalian whiskey. Watching the crowd through 4 tired eyes, his blue skin looked like old leather, covered in scars that told stories of 1,000 battles. Where his left arm should have been, only an empty sleeve remained. His right leg was clearly mechanical, clicking softly whenever he shifted in. His chair. The Zephyrian veteran had been coming to this same corner table for 15 years. Always alone, always watching. Tonight was different, though. A group of young cadets from the Galactic Military Academy had been eyeing him for over an hour. Their uniforms were so new, they still had creases. Faces were young and eager, unmarked by war. Finally, the tallest one worked up enough courage to approach. "Excuse me, sir," said Crix, his silver Valdorian scales gleaming under the dim lights. "You're Vextel, aren't you? The one who fought in the human wars?" The old veteran's mandibles clicked slowly as he looked up at the group. Behind Crix stood Thane, a massive Corvin, whose rocky skin made him look like a walking boulder. Next to him was Zira, a delicate Etherean whose translucent body glowed faintly blue. The last was Nyx, a spider-like arachnoid whose 8 eyes blinked nervously. "Depends who's asking," Vextel said, his voice rough like gravel. "We're Academy cadets," Crix explained, puffing out his chest. "We've heard the stories about humans. The legendary pink warriors who supposedly defeated the entire coalition fleet single-handedly." Vextal's laugh was bitter. "Legendary. You think humans are myths, boy?" Thane stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. "Come on, old-timer. The stories are clearly exaggerated. Humans beating our entire armada. Just primitive apes who barely learned to use fire a few thousand years ago? No way they could match coalition technology." The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them. Other patrons began to notice the conversation, some moving closer to listen. Vextel's 4 eyes narrowed as he stared at the young Corvon. "Primitive apes," he repeated slowly. "Is that what they teach you at the academy now?" Zira floated closer, her ethereal voice like wind chimes. The records showed that humans had no energy weapons, no plasma shields, no quantum computers. How could they possibly defeat forces 1,000 times more advanced? Vextel drained his whiskey and slammed the bottle down hard enough to crack the table. The sound echoed through the cantina like a gunshot. "I lost 3 limbs, half my squadron, and most of my sanity to those primitive apes. My ship, the Void Render, was torn apart by human weapons that shouldn't have been able to scratch our hull. So sit down, all of you, and let me tell you about the day I met real monsters." The cadets exchanged glances but slowly took seats around the scarred table. Other patrons began gathering behind them, forming a loose circle. Even the bartender, a 6-armed Nexilian, stopped mixing drinks to listen. "It was 47 years ago," Vextel began, his voice carrying across the Nazalon cantina. "First contact with humanity came at Kepler 438b, a worthless rock on the outer rim. Intelligence said it was lightly defended. Maybe a few mining stations, some civilian transports. Easy pickings for the 47th Coalition Strike Force." He gestured with his remaining arm, painting the scene. "We dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to see cargo haulers running scared. Instead, we found the human ship called Indomitable waiting. For us, ugly thing, all sharp angles and exposed weapons. Looked like it was built in someone's garage." Nyx's multiple eyes blinked rapidly. "Just one ship? Against an entire strike force?" "One ship," Vextel confirmed. "Admiral Kethron ordered us to hail them, offer standard surrender terms. That's when we first heard a human voice over our communications." The veteran's voice changed, becoming deeper and more commanding as he mimicked the human captain. "This is Captain Park Minsu of the Terran Defense Force. You have entered human space without permission. Turn around and leave, or we will defend ourselves." Thane snorted. "One ship threatening an entire fleet? What did your admiral do?" laughed Vextal, said simply. We all did. Kethrin ordered the decimator to disable their engines with a warning. Shot. Standard procedure for dealing with stubborn primitives. The old warrior's eyes grew distant, lost in the memory. The plasma bolt should have crippled them. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ship moved. Not turned or rolled, like normal ships do. It moved sideways, straight down, then forward again in a pattern that made no sense. Our targeting computers couldn't track it. Impossible, Crix whispered. That's what our weapons officer said, right before the human ship opened fire. Vextal's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his species. They didn't use plasma or particle beams. They shot chunks of metal. Bullets, they called them. Primitive, kinetic weapons that should have bounced off our shields like raindrops. He paused, refilling his glass from a new bottle. The decimator's shields failed in 30 seconds. Our hull was breached in 60. By the time our heavy cruiser exploded, the human ship was already targeting its next victim. The cantina was dead silent now. Even the background music had stopped. That's when Captain Parkmansu's voice came over the come again, Vextal continued. But this time he wasn't speaking to us. He was talking to his crew, and we could hear everything. The veteran stood up slowly, his mechanical leg worry. Softly, he said something I'll never forget. All hands, this is the captain. We've got 47 enemy ships and they think we're easy prey. Let's show these alien bastards what humans do to bullies. Lock and load people. It's time to dance, Vextal looked around at the gathered crowd, his 4 eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lights. That's when we learned our first lesson about humanity. They don't just fight to win. They fight like their lives depend on it. Because to them, every battle is personal. He sat back down heavily, the weight of memory pressing on his shoulders. The Indomitable tore through our formation like a shark through minnows. Every shot found its target. Every maneuver put them in perfect position for the next attack. And through it all, we could hear them on the comm channels. What were they saying? Zira asked, her voice barely a whisper. They were laughing, Vextal said, his voice full of old fear. While their ship took hits that should have killed them, all while their hull breached and their systems failed, they were actually laughing, like it was the best day of their lives. The old veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That's when I realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting something far more dangerous than any warrior in the galaxy. We were fighting humans who loved what they did. The second bottle of Rigelian whiskey sat empty on the table as Vextal stared into the darkness of his memories. The crowd around him had grown larger, with aliens from every corner of the cantina now listening in complete silence. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to hear his words. After the disaster at Kepler 438b, High Command was furious, Vextal continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Losing an entire strike force to one human ship made us look like fools. So they sent the Third Fleet to show these upstart humans what real warfare looked like. He pointed to a massive holographic display behind the bar that showed star charts. Fortress Zelthera was our crown jewel. Built into an asteroid the size of a small moon, with enough firepower to level entire planets. 30,000 coalition. Troops, the best shields money could buy, and weapon systems that could crack a battleship in half. Dane leaned forward, his rocky features showing doubt. How many humans attacked this fortress? 200, Vextal said simply. 200 humans and 20 small transport ships that looked like flying scrap metal. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Nyx's 8 eyes blinked rapidly as she tried to process the numbers. 200 against 30,000? That's impossible. Siege lasted 18 cycles, Vextal said, ignoring the interruption. 18 cycles of hell that taught us humans don't fight like any species in the galaxy. We thought we understood warfare. We were wrong. The old veteran's mechanical leg whirred as he shifted position. Day 1 started normal enough. The humans sent their transport ships straight at our main defenses. Suicide run, we thought. Our plasma cannons lit up space like a festival. But here's the thing about human transport ships. They're not just transports. He gestured with his remaining arm tracing patterns in the air. Each ship was a Trojan horse. While we were shooting at the hull, humans were already inside our defense grid. Sergeant Choi Ji-won led Alpha Squad through the waste disposal tunnels. Nobody guards garbage chutes, right? Wrong move when you're fighting humans? Zira's translucent. Form flickered with nervous energy. But surely your sensors detected them? Human soldiers don't show up on our sensors the way you'd expect, Vextal replied grimly. They move wrong. They think wrong. Our computers were programmed to track coalition military tactics. Humans fight like nothing we'd ever seen. Reached for another bottle, his hand shaking slightly. While Choi Ji-won's team crawled through sewage pipes, Private Yoon Hejian was doing something even crazier. He strapped himself to the outside of a supply shuttle and rode it through our landing bay shields. Spent 6 hours in hard vacuum just to get inside our perimeter. It should have killed him, Crick said, his silver scales rippling with confusion. Should have, yes. But humans are tough in ways that don't make sense, Yoon Hejin. Not only survived, he spent the next 4 hours sabotaging our shield generators from the inside. By the time we found him, half our defenses were already down. Vextal's 4 eyes grew distant as he remembered. But the real nightmare was watching them coordinate. Commander Jang Najin led the main assault on our front gates, loud, flashy, impossible to miss. While we focused all our attention on her team, Lieutenant Song Taemin was already inside our command center. How? Asked a voice from the crowd. Vextal looked up to see a scarred Andromedan captain who'd been listening from the bar. Magic, Vextal said bitterly. That's what we called it then. Now I know better. Humans don't need fancy communication. Arrays or quantum links. They think like a pack animal that evolved to hunt together. The old warrior stood up, his mechanical leg clicking against the floor. Let me show you what I mean. On day 3 of the siege, Corporal Shin Da-yoon was providing sniper cover from Tower 7. Coalition assassin put a plasma bolt through her. Chess should have ended her part in the battle. He paused, letting the silence build. But here's what happened next. Before Da-yoon even hit the ground, Private Lee Ji-hoo was already moving to her position. No orders given, no communication. Senti just knew she was down and knew what needed to be done. The crowd exchanged nervous glances. This kind of coordination seemed impossible without technology. Lee Jae-hoo took over her rifle and kept firing like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Medic Park Bio-young was already running toward Da-yoon's position with medical supplies. 3. Other humans formed a protective circle around them without being told. It was like watching a single organism repair itself. Vextal sat back down heavily. That's when I started to understand what we were really fighting. Not individual soldiers, but pieces of something larger. When one human fell, the others adapted. Instantly. When their ammunition ran low, they shared without hesitation. When retreat was the logical choice, they advanced. He pointed to his missing arm. I lost this on day 12. Human demolition expert named Kwon Hyo-jin had planted charges throughout our ammunition depot. I led a squad to defuse them, thinking we had plenty of time. We were wrong. The blast took out our entire eastern wall and 17 of my best soldiers. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was hearing Kwon Hyo-jin on our intercepted communications right after the explosion. He was apologizing to his team for not setting the charges deeper. Thane's rocky features showed confusion. Apologizing? Why? Because he'd only created a small breach instead of collapsing the entire fortress. To him, it was a partial failure. Vextal's mandibles clicked rapidly. That's when I realized humans don't just fight to win. They fight to exceed their own expectations. The veteran's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to lean in closer. But the moment that broke us all came on day 15. Captain Nam Soo-bin was holding Bridge 7 alone while his team evacuated civilian workers from the lower levels. One human against an entire battalion of our best troops. Surely one man couldn't hold off that many, Crix asked. For 4 hours he held that bridge. For hours of continuous combat against impossible odds, we threw everything at him. Plasma cannons, rocket launchers, nerve gas. Kept firing back with that ridiculous human projectile weapon, picking off our soldiers one by one. Voice cracked slightly. I was leading the charge when the bridge finally collapsed. Tons of metal and concrete crashed down, burying everything. We thought it was over. Thought we'd finally killed the unkillable human. The cantina was so quiet you could hear the station's life support systems humming in the walls. 3 days. Later, I was in the medical bay getting my arm replaced when I heard laughing from the next room. Human laughing. I dragged myself to the window and looked inside. The old veteran's eyes filled with something that might have been tears. There was Captain Nam Soo-bin, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, telling jokes to the coalition nurses, who were treating him, joking. After holding off a battalion single-handedly and surviving a building collapse, he was making the medical staff laugh. "That's impossible," whispered Nix. "That's humans," Vextel replied. "They don't just refuse to die. They refuse to let death break their spirit." Nam Soo-bin had 17 broken bones, internal bleeding, and burns across 60% of his body. The doctor said he should have been dead 3 times over. But there he was, flirting with an Arcturian nurse and asking if the hospital food came with hot sauce. The veteran drained his glass and looked around at the assembled crowd. That's when I understood the truth about human pack tactics. It's not just about fighting together. It's about never letting your packmates face anything alone. It's not combat, not pain, not even death. The siege ended 2 days later when the humans offered to let us surrender. Not because they'd won, they were down to their last ammunition clips and barely had enough medical supplies left. They offered surrender terms because they didn't want to see any more coalition soldiers die unnecessarily. The crowd sat in stunned silence as Vextel's words sank in. Finally, the Andromedon captain spoke up. "What happened to the fortress?" "Still there," Vextel said with a bitter laugh. "The humans turned it into a medical station. They're using our weapons depot as a children's hospital now, because that's what humans do. They turn instruments of war into tools for healing." He stood up slowly, preparing to continue his story. "But if you think the siege was bad, wait until I tell you about the chase. Wait until I tell you what happens when humans decide they're not done with you yet." The third bottle of whiskey sat untouched as Vextel's hands began to shake. The crowd around him had grown so large that aliens were standing on chairs and tables to hear his words. Even the station's security guards had abandoned their posts to listen. "After the fall of Zalthera, Admiral Kethron made the decision that would haunt us all," Vextel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Full retreat to the Gamma Sector. We'd jump across 3 star systems, putting thousands of light years between us and the humans. Simple logic. They couldn't follow what they couldn't catch." The old warrior's mechanical leg twitched as painful memories surfaced. We had 43 ships left from the original fleet. Battle cruisers, destroyers, support vessels, enough firepower to level a dozen worlds. Our jump drives were the fastest in the galaxy. Our cloaking technology was unmatched. We should have vanished like ghosts. Crix leaned forward, his silver scales catching the dim light, "But they followed you anyway." "Followed?" Vextel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Boy, they didn't just follow us. They hunted us like wild animals. And the worst part, they made it look easy." The veteran reached for his glass with a trembling hand. "The pursuit began 12 hours after we jumped to hyperspace. Sensors picked up a single human ship dropping out of warp behind us. A small vessel. Maybe 100 crew members. Thought it was a scout. Colonel Park Hee-jin was aboard that ship," he continued, his 4 eyes growing distant. "I learned later she was called the Bloodhound by her own people. Not because she was vicious, but because once she picked up a scent, she never let go." Thane's rocky features showed confusion. "One ship against your entire fleet? Why didn't you just destroy it?" "Tried," Vextel said grimly. Battle Group 7 peeled off to eliminate the threat. 3 heavy cruisers against 1 human vessel. Should have been over in minutes. The cantina held its collective breath as the veteran paused to gather his thoughts. The human ship vanished. Not destroyed, not retreating, vanished. Our sensors showed empty space. Then, 6 hours later, it reappeared behind Battle Group 7 and picked them off one by one. By the time we realized what was happening, 3 of our best ships were drifting hulks. An Etherean trader near the bar gasped audibly. "How is that possible? Humans don't fight fair. Vextel replied. They use every advantage, every trick, every dirty tactic in the book. And when the book runs out, they write new chapters. The old warrior's voice grew stronger as he warmed to his tale. For 37 days, that nightmare continued. Time we thought we'd lost them, Colonel Park's ship would materialize from nowhere. Always just out of weapons range, always watching, always following. But surely your crew needed rest. Zira asked, her translucent form flickering with nervous energy. That's what we thought, Vextel said bitterly. Coalition military doctrine requires 8-hour sleep cycles for meal periods per day and regular maintenance breaks. Standard procedure for any spacefaring species, but humans. ... He shook, his head in disbelief. While our night watch dozed at their stations, Lieutenant Kim Minji was analyzing our ion trail signatures. While our navigators took meal breaks, Sergeant O the Gin was calculating our next probable jump coordinates. They worked in shifts, but the hunt itself never stopped. The veteran stood up slowly, his mechanical leg whirring softly. Remember, day 15, clearly, we'd made an emergency jump to the Vega system, hoping to lose them in the asteroid field. Our crews were exhausted, making mistakes. 2 of our destroyers actually collided during the jump sequence. The humans appeared. 4 hours later, fresh as morning dew. Captain Lim Junho's voice came over the com channels, calm and polite as always. Coalition vessels, this is Captain Lim of the Terran ship Relentless. We know you're tired. We know you're running low on supplies. Surrender now, and we'll provide medical assistance and safe passage home. Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly. With agitation, we ignored him, of course. Made another jump to the Procyon system. But his ship followed. And the next jump. And the next. Always that same calm voice, offering the same terms. By day 20, our crews were having nervous breakdowns. Seeing human ships in every shadow, hearing Captain Lim's voice in their sleep. 3 of our navigators had to be sedated after they started hallucinating pursuit formations. The crowd around the table had grown completely silent, hanging on every word. That's when I learned the truth about human evolution, Vextel continued. Dr. Yethalai, our xenobiologist, had been studying captured human data. She discovered that on their homeworld, humans evolved as persistence hunters. What does that mean? Asked Nyx, her 8 eyes blinking nervously. Mean ass Nyx heard on. Mean ass Nyx her. Hey Steph's heard. Mean ass Nyx her. Ass Nyx her. 8 eyes her. 8 eyes her. 8 aid. Est her aid. 8 est els. Or ed. 8 as. We're Wade. We're Ed. We're Ed. Or Ed. Ed. Abel Ed. Ed. Wow wide. Ed Ed. Ed 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 Ed. On Earth, ancient humans would select a prey animal and simply follow it. Not chase it, not attack it, just follow. For days, weeks, across hundreds of kilometers, the prey would run until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then the humans would walk up and claim their kill. The implications of this revelation rippled through the crowd like a wave. They brought that same terrifying patience to space warfare. While we panicked and made desperate jumps, burning through fuel and wearing out our crews, the humans just ... followed, never hurrying, never stopping, never giving up. Vextel's voice cracked as he continued. Day 25, we lost the battlecruiser Voidhammer. Not to weapons fire, but to a reactor overload caused by an exhausted engineer who fell asleep at his station. Day 29, the destroyer pack. Leader Razorwing crashed into an asteroid because the pilot was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Captain Lim kept making the same offer every few hours. Always polite, always patient. Coalition vessels. This is Captain Lim, we're still here. We're still willing to talk. Your people don't have to die for their commander's pride. The veterans sat back down heavily. its mechanical parts clicking in worry. The end came on day 37 in the Rigel system. We'd been running for over a month, and our fleet was falling apart. Half our crew was in the medical bay, the other half was barely functional from exhaustion. That's when Captain Lim did something that broke us completely. His ship appeared on our screens, but this time it wasn't following. It was waiting, sitting dead in space directly along our escape route, like it had been there for hours. For eyes filled with old terror, its voice came over the com one last time. But now it was different, sad almost. Coalition vessels. This is Captain Lim. I know you're wondering how we got here first. The answer is simple. We know you better than you know yourselves. We've been predicting your jumps for the past week. You're tired, you're scared, and you're making the same mistakes prey animals have been making for millions of years. The cantina was so quiet that the sound of someone's breathing seemed loud. Then he said something that haunts me to this day. You can keep running if you want. We'll keep following. Not because we hate you, but because it's what we do. We're persistence predators, and you're acting like prey. This ends when you decide. To stop running, Vextel drained his glass and looked around at the assembled crowd. That's when Admiral Kethrin finally broke. 43 ships, thousands of crew members. The pride of the Coalition fleet, and we surrendered to a single human vessel because we simply couldn't run anymore. They didn't defeat us with superior weapons or brilliant tactics. They defeated us by being more patient than we could ever imagine. By never stopping, never giving up, never letting us rest. The old warrior's voice dropped to barely a whisper. When we finally surrendered, Captain Lim's first words weren't about victory or conquest. He asked if we needed medical supplies, if our injured crew members required treatment, if we were hungry. That's when I realized the most terrifying thing about humans. They'll hunt you across the galaxy with infinite patience. But the moment you surrender, they'll share their food with you and treat your wounded like family. He stood up slowly, preparing to continue his tale. But if you think being hunted by humans is bad, wait until I tell you about their creativity. Wait until I tell you what happens when human engineers get bored during a siege. The fourth bottle remained sealed as Vextel stared at his reflection in the polished metal table. The cantina had become a theater, with aliens packed shoulder to shoulder, some hanging from the ceiling fixtures to get a better view. The air was thick with tension and the smell of a dozen different worlds. If you think the 37-day chase was our lowest point, you're wrong, Vextel said, his voice carrying a new kind of horror. The real nightmare began at the Helix Nebula, where we learned that humans don't just adapt to impossible situations, they turn them into advantages. He gestured toward the star charts behind the bar, his mechanical fingers clicking against each other. High Command was desperate after losing so many fleets. They decided to make their final stand in the perfect killing ground, a stellar graveyard, filled with dead ships, radioactive asteroids, and enough cosmic radiation to fry any living thing in minutes. Thane's rocky features showed interest. Sounds like the perfect trap. That's what we thought, Vextel replied grimly. The Helix Nebula was where starships went to die. Thousands of wrecked vessels from a dozen species, floating in a soup of deadly particles and unstable energy fields. Nothing could survive there for more than an hour without heavy shielding. The veteran's four eyes grew distant as he remembered. We had 200 ships positioned around the nebula's edge, waiting for the humans to follow us in. Our plan was simple. Let the radiation kill them while we picked off any survivors from a safe distance. But the humans came anyway, asked Zira, her translucent form flickering with nervous energy. Oh, they came, Vextel said with bitter laughter. 12 human ships dove straight into that death trap, like it was a pleasant vacation spot. Led by engineer Seo Junho, aboard the vessel called Improvisation, should have been a quick execution. The old warrior stood up, his mechanical leg worry as he began to pace. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. Within 6 hours, those 12 ships had turned our perfect trap into their perfect weapon. How? Crix demanded, his silver scales rippling with confusion. Human creativity, Vextel said simply. While our computers were calculating radiation exposure and structural damage, Technical Sergeant Moon So-young was looking at all those dead ships. and seeing spare parts. She took mining lasers from derelict cargo haulers and jury-rigged them into plasma cannons that could punch through our heaviest armor. The crowd leaned forward, captivated by the impossible story. But that was just the beginning, Corporal Bay. Minho discovered that their damaged life support systems were producing toxic gas mixtures. Instead of fixing them, he weaponized them. Started pumping poisonous clouds into the nebula. Using the radiation storms to carry the chemicals straight to our positions, Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly with agitation. Every piece of space junk became a missile. Every radiation storm became a shield. Every dead ship became a fortress. The humans weren't just surviving in that hellscape, they were thriving in it. An Andromedan pilot near the bar called out, "But surely your superior numbers gave you an advantage?" "Numbers mean nothing when your enemy can turn physics itself into a weapon," Vextel replied. Lieutenant Park Sungmin figured out how to use the nebula's gravitational anomalies as a slingshot. His ship would disappear into a radiation storm, then come screaming out at impossible speeds to ram our vessels before vanishing again. The veteran paused at a table where a young Nexilian was frantically taking notes. But the most terrifying moment came when Major Han Guhon started her psychological warfare campaign. "Psychological warfare?" Nix asked, her 8 eyes blinking nervously. "Music," Vextel said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She started broadcasting human music across all communication channels during combat. Strange, haunting melodies that seemed to burrow into your brain and stay there. The cantina fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. You have to understand, coalition military doctrine is based on pure logic. Our computers calculate optimal strategies. Our warriors follow precise battle plans. But then we started hearing these human songs about death and sacrifice and love, and suddenly nothing made sense anymore. Vextel's voice grew stronger as he warmed to this part of the story. The first song was called Battle Hymn of the Republic. Ancient human war music that spoke of dying for freedom and marching toward victory. Our tactical computers couldn't process it. How do you fight an enemy who sings about dying gloriously? We were trying to analyze these battle songs. Private Kong the Bin was using the distraction to flank our positions. She'd modified her fighter craft to look like space debris, letting our sensors ignore her while she got into perfect attack position. Thane's confusion was evident. Music disrupted your military systems. It's not just disrupted, destroyed. Vextel replied. Our warriors started hesitating in combat, trying to understand why humans would sing about brotherhood while shooting at us. Our computers overheated, trying to process the emotional content of the songs. Logic-based artificial intelligence cannot comprehend why someone would find beauty in destruction. The old warrior's voice cracked slightly. The worst song was something called Amazing Grace, a human funeral hymn that Major Han broadcast while her forces were retreating from a failed assault. Our intercept teams recorded human soldiers singing it together while they carried their wounded to safety. A funeral song during retreat, Zira asked, her ethereal voice confused. That's when we realized humans don't separate life and death the way other species do. They see them as parts of the same story. While we feared death, they embraced it as another form of service. How do you fight warriors who treat dying as just another job to be done well? Vextel returned to his seat, his mechanical parts clicking in worry. But all of that paled compared to Captain Yu Min-seon's final gambit. His command ship, the Eternal Defiance, had taken critical damage and was venting atmosphere. Rational commander would have ordered evacuation. The crowd held its breath, sensing the climax of this part of the story. Instead, Captain Yu looked at his dying ship and saw one last weapon. He dismissed his crew to the escape pods, then turned the Eternal Defiance into a kinetic projectile aimed straight at our command dreadnought. But surely one ship couldn't threaten an entire dreadnought, Crix protested. Not at normal speeds, Vextel agreed. But Captain, you had been studying the nebula's gravitational anomalies for weeks. He used 3 dead stars and a black hole to accelerate his ship to 98% of light speed before impact. The veteran's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The collision released more energy than a supernova. The explosion was so massive it created a temporary neutron star that lasted for 17 minutes. 15,000 coalition ships were vaporized. Instantly, the shockwave destroyed everything within 3 light years. Silence filled the cantina like a physical presence. Captain Yu's last transmission was heard across the entire battlefield. Vextel continued. He was singing some ancient human song about going home, while his ship disintegrated around him, while he prepared to die in nuclear fire. He was singing about seeing his family again. The old warrior looked around at the stunned faces surrounding him. That's when I understood the most terrifying thing about human creativity. They don't just find new ways to win battles. They find new ways to make their deaths meaningful. After the Helix Nebula, Coalition High Command realized we weren't just fighting a military force. We were fighting a species that could turn any situation, no matter how hopeless, into an opportunity for victory. Rextal reached for the sealed bottle, his hands no longer shaking. But even after all that destruction, after all that death, the humans did something that broke our understanding of warfare completely. Something that proved they were more dangerous in peace than they ever were in war. He looked up at the crowd. With eyes that had seen too much, they showed us mercy. The 5th bottle sat unopened as Vextales's hands finally stopped shaking. The cantina had become a cathedral of silence, with hundreds of aliens from across the galaxy pressed together to hear the final chapter of his story. Even the station's automated systems seemed to quiet down, as if the machines themselves were listening. The war should have ended with total human victory, Vextel began, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on everyone present. After the Helix Nebula massacre, Coalition High Command was broken.
Our
fleets were scattered. Our worlds defenseless. Our people terrified of the pink-skinned monsters who could turn death itself into a weapon. The old veteran's mechanical leg clicked softly as he shifted position. The final battle came at Rigel Prime, our last stronghold. It was part of the 23rd Defense Corps, dug into bunkers that had taken 50 years to build, and we had enough supplies for a decade-long siege and weapons that could crack a moon in half. How many humans attacked? Asked Thane, his rocky voice barely a whisper. None, Vextel said simply. That's what made it so terrifying. The crowd exchanged confused glances. Nix's 8 eyes blinked rapidly as she tried to process this information. Admiral Chen Minyoung's fleet appeared in orbit around Rigel Prime on a Tuesday morning. 47 human vessels against our planetary defense grid. We expected immediate bombardment, orbital strikes, the usual human aggression. Dead. We got something far worse. Vextel stood up slowly, his scarred form casting long shadows in the dim light. A single transmission on all frequencies. Admiral Chen's voice, calm and patient as always. People of Rigel Prime, this is Admiral Chen Minyoung of the Terran Defense Force. We know you're scared. We know you think we're here to destroy your world. We're not. The transmission continued for 3 hours. The Admiral explaining human history, human values, human dreams. She talked about their homeworld, about children playing in parks, about families gathering for meals. She made humanity sound ... normal. The veteran's mandibles clicked nervously, but the most disturbing part was what she said next. We know you have families down there. We know you have children, parents, friends who never wanted this war. We're not here to punish them for the decisions of your leaders. We're here to offer you a choice. Crix's silver scales rippled with confusion. What kind of choice? Surrender without conditions, and humanity would guarantee safe passage home for every coalition soldier. Keep fighting, and they would wait. Not attack, not bombard, not invade. Just wait. Vextela's voice cracked slightly. Do you understand how terrifying that was? They were offering to let us go home to our families after we'd spent 5 years trying to exterminate them. The cantina held its collective breath as the old warrior continued. General Dexmore, our commanding officer, thought it was a trick. He ordered continued resistance, convinced the humans were planning some elaborate trap, so we waited in our bunkers while the human fleet sat in orbit, doing absolutely nothing. For 6 days, nothing happened. No attacks, no threats, no demands. Just 47 human ships waiting patiently in space, while we slowly went insane with anticipation. 4 eyes grew distant with memory. On day 7, everything changed. Not because of what the humans did, but because of what we did. A coalition transport tried to run the blockade with a load of civilian refugees, families trying to escape the coming battle. Our own defense grid shot it down. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several aliens gasped audibly. Automatic targeting systems designed to prevent anyone from leaving during a siege. Standard coalition protocol. The transport broke apart in orbit, spilling escape pods and debris across space. 237 civilians, including 86 children, floating helplessly in the void. Dextel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when we learned what human mercy really looked like. Within minutes, every human ship in the fleet was moving toward the debris field. Not to attack, not to secure tactical advantage, but to rescue coalition civilians from the wreckage we had created. The veteran sat back down heavily, his mechanical parts whirring and clicking. I watched through the bunker periscopes as human. Rescue teams worked for 18 hours straight, pulling survivors from damaged escape pods. Menekli the Jinn personally saved 43 coalition children, giving them oxygen from her own life support when their systems failed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was listening to the human communications during the rescue operation. They weren't talking about propaganda victories or strategic advantages. They were talking about getting those kids home, too. Their parents. Zira's translucent form flickered with emotion. What happened next? General Dexmore ordered our artillery to fire on the rescue ships, Vextel said, his voice filled with old shame. He claimed the humans were using the refugees as shields, that it was all part of their psychological warfare. But something unprecedented happened. The 23rd Defense Corps mutinied. The crowd murmured in surprise. Military mutiny was almost unheard of among coalition forces. Sergeant Kelthax disabled the artillery computers. Lieutenant Vexrin led a squad to arrest General Vexmore. Captain Zilionia opened direct communications with the human fleet and offered immediate surrender. Vextel's remaining hand trembled as he reached for his glass. That's when I had my first direct conversation with a human being. Supply Sergeant Park Dayan's voice came over our comm system, asking if we needed medical supplies for our wounded, not demanding surrender, not threatening retaliation for the civilian transport, asking if we needed medical help. The old warrior's voice cracked completely. 3 hours later, human shuttles were landing in our bunkers, but instead of soldiers with weapons, they sent doctors with medical kits and engineers with food replicators. Commander, Kim Tae-won personally delivered prisoner exchange terms that were more generous than our own military codes required. Full pardons for all enlisted personnel, medical treatment for the wounded, and free transport home for anyone who wanted to leave. Vextal stood up again, his scarred form seeming smaller somehow. But here's what broke me completely. Everything we'd done after 5 years of war. After trying to exterminate humanity, after shooting down our own refugees, Commander Kim asked me about my family. He'd somehow learned that I had a mate and 3 younglings back on Zephyr. Prime asked if I'd received any messages from them recently. When I said no, he had his communications officer establish a direct link to my homeworld so I could call them. The cantina was so quiet that the sound of the veterans' breathing seemed loud. I spent 2 hours talking to my family, while human soldiers stood guard to ensure my privacy. When my youngest asked if I was coming home, Commander Kim himself got on the line and promised that I would be on the next transport to Zephyr Prime. Vextal's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I understood the true horror of humanity. They could have glassed every coalition world from orbit. They had the firepower to exterminate us completely. Instead, they chose mercy. Not weakness, not hesitation, but deliberate, calculated compassion. Admiral Chen Minyoung could have ended the war with genocide. Instead, she ended it with kindness. The old warrior looked around at the assembled crowd, his 4 eyes reflecting. The cantina's dim lights. Captain Song Hyra had targeting solutions for every coalition nursery world but refused to fire. Lieutenant Colonel Wu Ji-hoon could have poisoned our water supplies but sent medical aid instead. They fought with devastating efficiency while maintaining moral codes that often put them at tactical disadvantage. The war officially ended 6 months later with the Treaty of New Geneva. But for me, it ended the moment Commander Kim helped me call my family. Bextel began walking slowly toward the cantina exit, his mechanical leg clicking against the floor. You asked me about humans? Cadets? About the legendary pink warriors who defeated the coalition fleet? Here's what you need to understand. He paused at the door, looking back at the crowd one final time. We call them the merciful predators. Now, beings who hunt with perfect lethality but kill only when necessary. They could rule the galaxy through fear, but they chose to earn our respect through restraint.
Today,
Human Sergeant Major Cho Min-soo commands the defense grid protecting Zephyr Prime, the same world I was trying to defend when they captured me. My own children call him Uncle Min-soo and bring him drawings they made in school. The veterans. Voice grew stronger as he delivered his final words. That's the most terrifying thing about humans. They'll die for strangers, fight for the innocent, and forgive the unforgivable. How do you defeat an enemy who turns conquered foes into grateful allies? The answer is simple. You don't. You join them. Bextel limped out into the corridor, leaving behind a cantina full of beings who would never look at humanity the same way again. In the darkness between stars, the greatest victory wasn't written in blood or carved in stone. It was written in the hearts of former enemies who had learned what mercy truly meant. The cadets sat in stunned silence for long minutes after the veterans' departure. Finally, Crick spoke up, his voice barely audible. We're not just sharing a galaxy with humanity. No, Thane replied, understanding dawning in his rocky features. We're under their protection. One by one, the aliens filed out of the cantina, each carrying with them a new understanding of what it meant to be human. In the vast cosmos, where strength was often measured in firepower and fear, humanity had proven that the greatest weapon of all was knowing when not to use it. Above them, unseen human patrol ships continued their eternal watch, protecting former enemies and new friends alike from the dangers that lurked in the dark between stars. The end.